Chapter 15. A Godly Birthday Party. They took Carter to a different dormitory, so I don't know how he slept, but I couldn't get a wink. It would have been hard enough with Zia's comments about passing our test or dying, but the girls' dormitory just wasn't as posh as Amos's mansion. The stone walls sweated moisture. Creepy pictures of Egyptian monsters danced across the ceiling in the torchlight. I got a floating cot to sleep in, and the other girls in training, initiates, Zia had called them, were much younger than me, so when the old dorm matron told them to go to sleep straight away, they obeyed. The matron waved her hand and the torches went out. She shut the door behind her, and I could hear the sound of locks clicking. Lovely, imprisoned in a nursery school dungeon. I stared into the dark until I heard the other girls snoring. A single thought kept bothering me, an urge I just couldn't shake. Finally, I crept out of bed and tugged on my boots. I felt my way to the door. I tugged at the handle, locked, as I suspected. I was tempted to kick it till I remembered what Zia had done in the Cairo airport broom closet. I pressed my palm against the door and whispered, "Sahad." Locks clicked. The door swung open. Handy trick. Outside, the corridors were dark and empty. Apparently there wasn't much nightlife in the first Nome. I sneaked through the city back the way we'd come and saw nothing but an occasional cobra slithering across the floor. After the last couple of days, that didn't even faze me. I thought about trying to find Carter, but I wasn't sure where they'd taken him, and honestly, I wanted to do this on my own. After our last argument in New York, I wasn't sure how I felt about my brother. The idea that he could be jealous of my life, well, he got to travel the world with Dad. Please. And he had the nerve to call my life normal. All right, I had a few mates at school like Liz and Emma, but my life was hardly easy. If Carter had made a social faux pas or met people he didn't like, he could just move on. I had to stay put. I couldn't answer simple questions like, "Where are your parents?" or "What does your family do?" or even, "Where are you from?" without exposing just how odd my situation was. I was always the different girl, the mixed race girl, the American who wasn't American, the girl who made trouble in class, the girl who couldn't concentrate on her lessons. After a while, one learns that blending in simply doesn't work. If people are going to single me out, I might as well give them something to stare at. Red stripes in my hair? Why not? Combat boots with the school uniform? Absolutely. Headmaster says, "I'll have to call your parents, young lady." I say, "Good luck." Carter didn't know anything about my life. But enough of that. The point was, I decided to do this particular bit of exploring alone, and after a few wrong turns, I found my way back to the Hall of Ages. What was I up to, you ask? I certainly didn't want to meet Monsieur Evil again or creepy old Lord Salamander, but I did want to see those images. Memories, Zia had called them. I pushed open the bronze doors. Inside, the hall seemed deserted. No balls of fire floated through the ceiling, no glowing hieroglyphs, but images still shimmered between the columns, washing the hall with strange, multicolored light. I took a few nervous steps. I wanted another look at the age of the gods. On our first trip through the hall, something about those images had shaken me. I knew Carter thought I'd gone into a dangerous trance, and Zia had warned that the scenes could melt my brain, but I felt a feeling she was just trying to scare me off. I felt a connection to those images, like there was an answer within, a vital piece of information I needed. I stepped off the carpet and approached the curtain of golden light. I saw sand dunes shifting in the wind, storm clouds brewing, crocodiles sliding down the Nile. I saw a vast hall full of revelers. I touched the image, and I was in the palace of the gods. Huge beings swirled around me, changing shape from human to animal to pure energy. On a throne in the center of the room sat a muscular African man in rich black robes. He had a handsome face and warm brown eyes. His hands looked strong enough to crush rocks. The other guards celebrated around him. Music played, a sound so powerful that the air burned. At the man's side stood a beautiful woman in white, her belly swollen as if she were a few months pregnant. Her form flickered. At times she seemed to have multicolored wings. Then she turned in my direction and I gasped. She had my mother's face. She didn't seem to notice me. In fact, none of the guards did, until a voice behind me said, "Are you a ghost?" I turned and saw a good-looking boy of about 16, dressed in black robes. His complexion was pale, but he had lovely brown eyes, like the man on the throne. His black hair was long and tousled, rather wild, but it worked for me. He tilted his head, and it finally occurred to me that he'd asked me a question. I'd tried to think of something to say. "Excuse me? Hello? Marry me?" Anything would have done. All I could manage was a shake of the head. "Not a ghost, eh?" he bemused. "A bar, then?" He gestured toward the throne. "Watch, but do not interfere." Somehow I wasn't interested in watching the throne so much, but the boy in black dissolved into a shadow and disappeared, leaving me no further distraction. "Isis," said the man on the throne. The pregnant woman turned towards him and beamed. "My Lord Osiris, happy birthday." "Thank you, my love, and soon we shall mark the birth of our son, Horus, the Great One. His new incarnation shall be his greatest yet. He shall bring peace and prosperity to the world." Isis took her husband's hand. Music kept playing around them, gods celebrating, the very air swirling in a dance of creation. Suddenly, the palace doors blew open. A hot wind made the torches sputter. A man strode into the hall. He was tall and strong, almost a twin to Osiris, but with dark red skin, blood-colored robes, and a pointed beard. He looked human except when he smiled. Then his teeth turned to fangs. His face flickered. Sometimes human, sometimes strangely wolf-like. I had to stifle a scream because I'd seen that wolfish face before. The dancing stopped. The music died. Osiris rose from his throne. "Set," he said in a dangerous tone. "Why have you come?" Set laughed, and the tension in the room broke. Despite his cruel eyes, he had a wonderful laugh, nothing like the screeching he'd done at the British Museum. It was carefree and friendly, as if he couldn't possibly mean any harm. "I come to celebrate my brother's birthday, of course," he exclaimed, "and I bring entertainment." He gestured behind him. 4 huge men with heads of wolves marched into the room, carrying a jewel-encrusted golden coffin. My heart began to race. It was the same box Set had used to imprison my dad at the British Museum. "No!" I wanted to scream. "Don't trust him!" But the assembled guards oohed and ahed, admiring the box, which was painted with gold and red hieroglyphs, trimmed with jade and opals. The wolfmen set the box down, and I saw it had no lid. The interior was lined with black linen. "This sleeping casket," Set announced, "was made by my finest craftsmen, using the most expensive materials. Its value is beyond measure. The god who lies within it, even for a night, will see his powers increase tenfold. His wisdom will never falter. His strength will never fail. It is a gift." He smiled slyly at Osiris. "For the one and only god who fits within perfectly." I wouldn't have queued up first, but the gods surged forward. They pushed each other out of the way to get into the golden coffin. Some climbed in but were too short. Others were much too big. Even when they tried to change the shapes, the gods had no luck, as if the magic box were thwarting them. No one fit exactly. Gods grumbled and complained at each other, anxious to try, pushing them to the ground. Set turned to Osiris with a good-natured laugh. "Well, brother, we have no winner yet. Will you try? Only the best of the gods can succeed." Osiris's eyes gleamed. Apparently, he wasn't the god of brains, because he seemed completely taken in by the box's beauty. All the other gods looked at him expectantly, and I could see what he was thinking. If he fits the box, what a brilliant birthday present. Even Set, his wicked brother, would have to admit that he was the rightful king of the gods. Only Isis seemed troubled. She laid her hand on her husband's shoulder. "My lord, do not. Set does not bring presents." "I am offended." Set sounded genuinely hurt. "Can I not celebrate my brother's birthday? Are we so estranged that I cannot even apologize to the king?" Osiris smiled at Isis. "My dear, it is only a game. Fear nothing." He rose from his throne. The gods applauded as he approached the box. "All hail Osiris," Set cried. The king of the gods lowered himself into the box, and when he glanced in my direction just for a moment, he had my father's face. "No," I thought again, "don't do it." But Osiris lay down. The coffin fit him exactly. A cheer went up from the gods, but before Osiris could rise, Set clapped his hands. A golden lid materialized above the box and slammed down on top of it. Osiris shouted in rage, but his cries were muffled. Golden latches fastened around the lid. The other gods surged forward to intervene. Even the boy in black I had seen earlier reappeared, but Set was faster. He stamped his foot so hard the stone floor trembled. The gods toppled over each other like dominoes. The wolfmen drew their spears, and the gods scrambled away in terror. Set said a magic word, and a boiling cauldron appeared out of thin air. He poured its contents over the coffin, molten lead, coating the box, sealing it shut, probably heating the interior to 1,000 degrees. "Villain!" Isis wailed. She advanced on Set and began to speak a spell, but Set held up his hand. Isis rose from the floor, clawing at her mouth. Her lips pressed as if an invisible force was suffocating her. "Not today, lovely Isis," Set purred. "Today I am king, and your child shall never be born." Suddenly, another goddess, a slender woman in a blue dress, charged out of the crowd. "Husband, no!" She tackled Set, who momentarily lost concentration. Isis fell to the floor, gasping. The other goddess yelled, "Flee!" Isis turned and ran. Set rose. I thought he would hit the goddess in blue, but he only snarled. "Foolish wife, whose side are you on?" He stamped his foot again, and the golden coffin sank into the floor. Set raced after Isis. At the edge of the palace, Isis turned into a small bird of prey and soared into the air. Set sprouted demon's wings and launched himself in pursuit. Then suddenly I was the bird. I was Isis, flying desperately over the Nile. I could sense Set behind me, closing. "You must escape," the voice of Isis said in my mind. "Avenge Osiris, crown Horus king." Just when I thought my heart would burst, I felt a hand on my shoulder. The images evaporated. The old master Iskander stood behind me, his face pinched with concern. Glowing hieroglyphs danced around him. "Forgive the interruption," he said in perfect English, "but you were almost dead." That's when my knees turned to water and I lost consciousness. When I awoke, I was curled at Iskander's feet on the steps below the empty throne. We were alone in the hall, which was mostly dark except for the light from the hieroglyphs that always seemed to glow around him. "Welcome back," he said. "You're lucky you survived." I wasn't so sure. My head felt like it had been boiled in oil. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to look at the images, and yet you did. Your bar left your body and entered the past. Hadn't you been warned?" "Yes," I admitted, "but I was drawn to the pictures." Iskander stared into space as if remembering something from long ago. "They are hard to resist." "You speak perfect English," I noticed. Iskander smiled. How do you know I'm speaking English? Perhaps you are speaking Greek? I hoped he was kidding, but I couldn't tell. He seemed so frail and warm, and yet it was like sitting next to a nuclear reactor. I had a feeling he was full of more danger than I wanted to know. You're not really that old, are you? I asked. I mean, old enough to remember the Ptolemaic times? I am exactly that old, my dear. I was born in the reign of Cleopatra VII. Oh, please. I assure you it's true. It was my sorrow to behold the last days of Egypt before that foolhardy queen lost our kingdom to the Romans. I was the last magician to be trained before the house went underground. Many of our most powerful secrets were lost, including the spells my master used to extend my life. Magicians these days still live long, sometimes centuries, but I have been alive for 2 millennia. So you're immortal. His chuckle turned into a racking cough. He doubled over and cupped his hands over his mouth. I wanted to help, but I wasn't sure how. The glowing hieroglyphs flickered and dimmed around him. Finally, the coughing subsided. He took a shaky breath. Hardly immortal, my dear. In fact, his voice trailed off. But never mind that. What did you see in your vision? I probably should have kept quiet, but I didn't want to be turned into a bug for breaking any rules, and the vision had terrified me, especially the moment when I changed into the bird of prey. But Iskander's kindly expression made it hard to hold back. I ended up telling him everything. Well, almost everything. I left out the bit about the good-looking boy, and yes, I know it was silly, but I was embarrassed. I reckon that part could have been my own crazed imagination at work, as ancient Egyptian gods could not have been that gorgeous. Iskander sat for a moment, tapping his staff against the steps. You saw a very old event, Sadie. Set taking the throne of Egypt by force. He hid Osiris's coffin, you know, and Isis searched the entire world to find it. So she got him back eventually? Not exactly. Osiris was resurrected, but only in the underworld. He became the king of the dead. When their son Horus grew up, Horus challenged Set for the throne of Egypt and won after many hard battles. That is why Horus was called the Avenger. As I said, an old story, but one that the gods have repeated many times in our history. Repeated? The gods follow patterns. In some ways they are quite predictable, acting out the same squabbles, the same jealousies down through the ages. Only the setting changed, and the hosts. There was that word again, hosts. I thought about the poor woman in the New York Museum who turned into the goddess Serket. In my vision, I said, Isis and Osiris were married. Horus was about to be born as their son. But in another story, Carter told me all 3 of them were siblings, children of the sky goddess. Yes, Iskander agreed. This can be confusing for those who do not know the nature of gods. They cannot walk the earth in their pure form, at least not for more than a few moments. They must have hosts. Humans, you mean? Or powerful objects such as statues, amulets, monuments, certain models of cars. But they prefer human hosts. You see, the gods have great power, but only humans have creativity. The power to change history rather than simply repeat it. Humans can, how do you moderns say it? Think outside the cup. The box, I suggested. Yes, the combination of human creativity and godly power can be quite formidable. At any rate, when Osiris and Isis first walked the earth, their hosts were brother and sister. But mortal hosts are not permanent. They die, they wear out. Later in history, Osiris and Isis took forms, new forms. Humans who were husband and wife. Horus, who in one lifetime was their brother, was born into a new life as their son. That's confusing, I said, and a little gross. Iskander shrugged. The gods do not think of relationships the way humans do. Their hosts are merely like changes of clothes. This is why the ancient stories seem so mixed up. Sometimes the gods are described as married, or siblings, or parent and child, depending on their hosts. The pharaoh himself was called the living god, you know. Egyptologists believe this was just a lot of propaganda, but in fact, it was often literally true. The greatest of the pharaohs became hosts for gods, usually Horus. He gave them power and wisdom, and let them build Egypt into a mighty empire. But that's good, isn't it? Why is it against the law to host a god? Iskander's face darkened. Gods have different agendas than humans do, Sadie. They can overpower their hosts, literally burn them out. That is why so many hosts die young. Tutankhamun, poor boy, died at 19. Cleopatra VII was even worse. She tried to host the spirit of Isis without knowing what she was doing, and it shattered her mind. In the old days, the House of Life taught the use of divine magic. Initiates could study the path of Horus, Isis, or Sekhmet, or any number of gods, learning to channel their powers. We had many more initiates back then. Iskander looked around the empty hall, as if imagining it filled with magicians. Some adepts would call upon the gods only from time to time. Others attempted to host their spirits, with varying degrees of success. The ultimate goal was to become the eye of the god, a perfect union of the two souls, mortal and immortal. Very few achieved this, even among the pharaohs who were born to the task. Many destroyed themselves trying. He turned up his palm, which had the most deeply etched lifeline I'd ever seen. When Egypt finally fell to the Romans, it became clear to us, to me, that mankind, our rulers, even the strongest magicians, no longer had the strength of will to master a god's power. The only ones who could... His voice faltered. What? Nothing, my dear. I talk too much. An old man's weakness. It's the blood of the pharaohs, isn't it? He fixed me in his gaze. His eyes no longer looked milky. They burned with intensity. You are a remarkable young girl. You remind me of your mother. My mouth fell open. You knew her? Of course. She trained here, as did your father. Your mother, well, aside from being a brilliant scientist, she had the gift of divination, one of the most difficult forms of magic, and she was the first in centuries to possess it. Divination? Seeing the future. Tricky business, never perfect, but she saw things that made her seek advice from unconventional places. Things that made even this old man question some long-held beliefs. He drifted off into memory land again, which was infuriating enough when my grandparents did it. But when it's an all-powerful magician who has valuable information, it's enough to drive one mad. Iskander, he looked at me with mild surprise, as if he had forgotten I was there. I'm sorry, Sadie. I should come to the point. You have a hard path ahead of you, but I'm convinced now it's a path you must take, for all our sake. Your brother will need your guidance. I was tempted to laugh. Carter, need my guidance? For what? What path do you mean? All in good time. Things must take their course. Typical adult answer. I tried to bite back my frustration. And what if I need guidance? Zia, he said without hesitation. She is my best pupil, and she is wise. When the time comes, she will know how to help you. Right, I said, a bit disappointed. Zia. For now you should rest, my dear, and it seems I, too, can rest at last. He sounded sad but relieved. I didn't know what he was talking about, but he didn't give me the chance to ask. I'm sorry our time together was so brief, he said. Sleep well, Sadie Kane. But Iskander touched my forehead, and I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Chapter 16. How Zia lost her eyebrows. I woke to a bucket of ice water in my face. Sadie, get up, Zia said. God, I yelled, was that necessary? No, Zia admitted. I wanted to strangle her, except I was dripping wet, shivering, and still disoriented. How long had I slept? It felt like only a few minutes, but the dormitory was empty. All the other cots were made. The girls must have already gone to their morning lessons. Zia tossed me a towel and some fresh linen clothes. We'll meet Carter in the cleansing room. I just got a bath, thanks very much. What I need is a proper breakfast. The cleansing prepares you for magic. Zia slung a bag of tricks over her shoulder and unfolded the long black staff she'd used in New York. If you survive, we'll see about food. I was tired of being reminded that I might die, but I got dressed and followed her out. After another endless series of tunnels, we came to a chamber with a roaring waterfall. There was no ceiling, just a shaft above us that seemed to go up forever. Water fell from the darkness into a fountain, splashing over a 5-meter-tall statue of that bird-headed god. What was his name? Thoth. The water cascaded over his head, collected in his palms, then spilled out into the pool. Carter stood beside the fountain. He was dressed in linen with Dad's work bag over one shoulder and his sword strapped to his back. His hair was rumpled as if he hadn't slept well. At least he hadn't been doused in ice water. Seeing him, I felt a strange sense of relief. I thought about Iskander's words last night. Your brother will need your guidance. What? Carter asked. You're staring at me funny. Nothing, I said quickly. How'd you sleep? Badly. I'll tell you about it later. Was it my imagination, or did he frown in Zia's direction? Possible romantic trouble between Miss Magic and my brother. I made a mental note to interrogate him next time we were alone. Zia went to a nearby cabinet. She brought out 2 ceramic cups, dipped them in the fountain, then offered them to us. Drink. I glanced at Carter. After you. It's only water, Zia assured me, but purified by contact with Thoth. It will focus your mind. I couldn't see how a statue could purify water. Then I remembered what Iskander has said, how gods could inhabit anything. I took a drink. Immediately, I felt like I had a good, strong cup of Grand's tea. My brain buzzed, my eyesight sharpened. I felt so hyperactive, I almost didn't miss chewing gum. Almost. Carter sipped from his cup. Wow. Now the tattoos, Zia announced. Brilliant, I said. On your tongue, she added. Excuse me? Zia stuck out her tongue. Right in the middle was a blue hieroglyph. Nith ith net. She tried to say with her tongue out. Then she realized her mistake and stuck her tongue back in. I mean, this is ma'at, the symbol of order and harmony. It will help you speak magic clearly. One mistake with a spell. Let me guess. I said, we'll die. From a cabinet of horrors, Zia produced a fine-tipped paintbrush and a bowl of blue dye. It doesn't hurt, and it's not permanent. How does it taste? Carter wondered. Zia smiled. Stick out your tongue. To answer Carter's question, the tattoo tasted like burning car tires. Ugh! I spit a blue gob of order and harmony into the fountain. Never mind breakfast. Lost my appetite. Zia pulled the leather satchel out of the cabinet. Carter will be allowed to keep your father's magic implements, plus a new staff and wand. Generally speaking, the wand is for defense. The staff is for offense. Although, Carter, you may prefer to use your koppish. Koppish? The curved sword, Zia said, a favoured weapon of the Pharaoh's guard. It can be used in combat magic. As for Sadie, he will need a full kit. How come he gets Dad's kit? I complained. He is the eldest, she said, as if that explained everything. Typical. Zia tossed me the leather satchel. Inside was an ivory wand, a rod that I suppose turned into a staff, some paper, an ink set, a bit of twine, and a lovely chunk of wax. I was less than thrilled. What about a little wax man? I asked. I want a doughboy. If you mean a figurine, you must make one yourself. You will be taught how, if you have the skill. It will determine your specialty later. Specialty? Carter asked. You mean like Nectanebo specialise in statues? Zia nodded. Nectanebo was extremely skilled in statuary magic. He could make Shabti so lifelike they could pass for human. No one has ever been greater at statuary, except perhaps Iskander. But there are many other disciplines. Healer, amulet maker, animal charmer, elementalist, combat magician, necromancer. Diviner? I asked. Zia looked at me curiously. Yes, although that is quite rare. Why do you... I cleared my throat. So how do we know our specialty? It will become clear soon enough, Zia promised. But a good magician knows a bit of everything, which is why we start with a basic test. Let us go to the library. The first gnome's library was like Amos's, but 100 times bigger, with circular rooms lined with honeycomb shelves that seemed to go on forever, like the world's largest beehive. Clay Shabti statues kept popping in and out, retrieving scroll canisters and disappearing, but we saw no other people. Zia brought us to a wooden table and spread out a long, blank papyrus scroll. She picked up a stylus and dipped it in ink. The Egyptian word shesh, meaning scribe or writer, but can also mean magician. This is because magic, at its most basic, turns words into reality. We'll create a scroll using your own magic. You will send power into the words on paper. When spoken, the words will unleash the magic. She handed the stylus to Carter. I don't get it, he protested. A simple word, she suggested. It can be anything. In English, Zia curled her lip. If you must. Any language will work, but hieroglyphics are best. They are the language of creation, of magic, of ma'at. You must be careful, however. Before she could explain, Carter drew a simple hieroglyph of a bird. The picture wriggled, peeled itself off the papyrus and flew away. It splattered Carter's head with some hieroglyphic droppings on its way out. I couldn't help laughing at Carter's expression. A beginner's mistake, Zia said, scowling at me to be quiet. If you use a symbol that stands for something alive, it is wise to write it only partially. Leave off a wing or the legs. Otherwise, the magic you channel could make it come alive. And poop on its creator, Carter sighed, wiping off his hair with a bit of scrap papyrus. That's why our father's fat wax statue doughboy has no legs, right? The same principle, Zia agreed. Now, try again. Carter stared at Zia's staff, which was covered in hieroglyphics. He picked the most obvious one and copied it on the papyrus, the symbol for fire. Uh-oh, I thought. But the word did not come alive, which would have been rather exciting. It simply dissolved. Keep trying, Zia urged. Why am I so tired? Carter wondered. He definitely looked exhausted. His face was beaded with sweat. You're channeling magic from within, Zia said. For me, fire is easy, but it may not be the most natural type of magic for you. Try something else. Summon a sword. Zia showed him how to form the hieroglyph, and Carter wrote it on the papyrus. Nothing happened. Speak it, Zia said. Sword, Carter said. The word glowed and vanished, and a butter knife lay on the papyrus. I laughed. Terrifying! Carter looked like he was about to pass out, but he managed to grin. He picked up the knife and threatened to poke me with it. Very good for a first time, Zia said. Remember, you are not creating the knife yourself. You are summoning it from Ma'at, the creative power of the universe. Hieroglyphs are the code we use. That's why we are called divine words. The more powerful the magician, the easier it comes to control the language. I caught my breath. Those hieroglyphs floating in the Hall of Ages, they seem to gather around Iskander. Was he summoning them? Not exactly, Zia said. His presence is so strong. He makes the language of the universe simply visible, simply by being in the room. No matter what our specialty, each magician's greatest hope is to become a speaker of the divine words, to know the language of creation so well that we can fashion reality simply by speaking, not even using a scroll. Like saying shatter, I ventured, and having a door explode. Zia scowled. Yes, but such a thing would take years of practice. Really? Well, out of the corner of my eye I saw Carter shaking his head, silently warning me to shut up. I stammered. Someday I'll learn to do that. Zia raised an eyebrow. First, master the scroll. I was getting tired of her attitude, so I picked up the stylus and wrote fire in English. Zia leaned forward and frowned. You shouldn't... But before she could finish, a column of fire erupted in her face. I screamed, sure I'd done something horrible, but when the fire died, Zia was still there, looking astonished, her eyebrows singed and her bangs smoldering. Oh, God, I said, sorry. Do I die now? For 3 heartbeats, Zia stared at me. Now, she announced, I think you are ready to duel. We used another magic gateway, which Zia summoned right on the library wall. We stepped into a circle of swirling sound and popped out on the other side, covered in dust and grit, in front of some ruins. The harsh sunlight almost blinded me. I hate portals, Carter murmured, brushing the sand out of his hair. Then he looked around and his eyes widened. This is Luxor. That's like hundreds of miles south of Cairo. I sighed. And that amazes you after teleporting from New York? He was too busy checking out our surroundings to answer. I suppose the ruins were all right, though once you've seen one pile of crumbling Egyptian stuff, you've seen them all, I say. We stood on a wide avenue flanked by human-headed beasties, most of which were broken. The road went on behind us as far as I could see, but in front of us it ended at a temple, much bigger than the one in the New York Museum. The walls were at least 6 stories high. Big stone pharaohs stood guard on either side of the entrance, and a single obelisk stood on the left-hand side. It looked as if one used to stand on the right as well, but it was gone now. Luxor is a modern name, Zia said. This was once the city of Thebes. This city was one of the most important in Egypt. It is the best place for us to practice. Because it's already destroyed? I asked. Zia gave me one of her famous scowls. No, Sadie, because it's still full of magic, and it was sacred to your family. Our family? Carter asked. Zia didn't explain, as usual. She just gestured for us to follow. I don't like those ugly sphinxes, I mumbled as we walked down the path. Those ugly sphinxes are creatures of law and order, Zia said, protectors of Egypt. They are on our side. If you say so. Carter nudged me as we passed the obelisk. You know the missing one is in Paris. I rolled my eyes. Thank you, Mr. Wikipedia. I thought they were in New York and London. That's a different pair, Carla said, like I was supposed to care. The other Luxor obelisk is in Paris. Wish I was in Paris, I said. A lot better than this place. We walked into a dusty courtyard surrounded by crumbling pillars and statues with various missing body parts. Still, I could tell the place had once been quite impressive. Where are the people? I asked. Middle of the day, winter holidays? Shouldn't there be loads of tourists? Zia made a distasteful expression. Usually, yes. I have encouraged them to stay away for a few hours. How? Common minds are easy to manipulate. She looked pointedly at me, and I remember how she'd forced me to talk in the New York Museum. Oh yes, she was just begging for more scorched eyebrows. Now, to the duel. She summoned her staff and drew 2 circles in the stand about 10 meters apart. She directed me to stand in one of them and Carter in the other. I've got to duel him? I asked. I found the idea preposterous. The only thing Carter had shown aptitude for was summoning butter knives and pooping birds. Well, all right. And that bit on the chasm bridge, deflecting the daggers, but still, what if I hurt him? As annoying as Carter might be, I didn't want to accidentally summon the glyph I'd made in Amos's house and explode him to bits. Perhaps Carter was thinking the same, because he'd started to sweat. What if we do something wrong? He asked. I will oversee the duel, Zia promised. We will start slowly. The first magician to knock the other out of his or her circle wins. But we haven't been trained, I protested. One learns by doing, Zia said. This is not school, Sadie. You can't learn magic by sitting at a desk and taking notes. You can only learn magic by doing magic. But summon whatever power you can, Zia said. Use whatever you have available. Begin. I looked at Carter doubtfully. Use whatever I have. I opened the leather satchel and looked inside. A lump of wax? Probably not. I drew the wand and rod. Immediately, the rod expanded until I was holding a 2-meter-long white staff. Carter drew his sword, though I couldn't imagine what he'd do with it. Rather hard to hit me from 10 meters away. I wanted this over, so I raised my staff like I'd seen Zia do. I thought the word fire. A small flame sputtered to life on the end of the staff. I willed it to get bigger. The fire momentarily brightened, but then my eyesight went fuzzy. The flame died. I fell to my knees, feeling as if I'd run a marathon. You okay? Carter called. No, I complained. If she knocks herself out, do I win? He asked. Shut up, I said. Sadie, you must be careful, Zia called. You draw from your own reserves, not from the staff. You can quickly deplete your magic. I got shakily to my feet. Explain? A magician begins a duel full of magic, the way you might be full after a good meal. Which I never got, I reminded her. Each time you do magic, Zia continued, you expend energy. You can draw energy from yourself, but you must know your limits. Otherwise you could exhaust yourself, or worse. I swallowed and looked at my smoldering staff. How much worse? You could literally burn up. I hesitated, thinking how to ask my next question without saying too much. But I've done magic before. Sometimes it doesn't exhaust me. Why? From around her neck, Zia unclasped an amulet. She threw it into the air, and with a flash it turned into a giant vulture. The massive black bird soared over the ruins. As soon as it was out of sight, Zia extended her hand and the amulet appeared in her palm. Magic can be drawn from many sources, she said. It can be stored in scrolls, wands, or staffs. Amulets are especially powerful. Magic can also be drawn straight from art, using the divine words. But this is difficult. Or, she locked eyes with me. It can be summoned from the gods. Why are you looking at me? I demanded. I didn't summon any gods. They just seemed to find me. She put on a necklace but said nothing. Hold on, Carter said. You claim this place was sacred to our family. It was, Zia agreed. But wasn't this... Carter frowned. Didn't the pharaohs have a yearly festival here or something? Indeed, she said. The pharaoh would walk down the processional hall all the way from Karnak to Luxor. He would enter the temple and become one with the gods. Sometimes this was purely ceremonial. Sometimes, with the great pharaohs like Ramses, here, Zia pointed to one of the huge crumbling statues, they actually hosted the gods. I interrupted, remembering what Iskandar had said. Zia narrowed her eyes. And yet you claim to know nothing of your family's past. Wait a second, Carter protested. You're saying we're related to... The gods chose their hosts carefully, Zia said. They always prefer the blood of the pharaohs. When a magician has the blood of two royal families... I exchanged looks with Carter. Something Bast said came back to me. Your family was born to magic. And Amos had told us that both sides of our family had a complicated history with the gods, and that Carter and I were the most powerful children to be born in centuries. A bad feeling settled over me, like an itchy blanket prickling against my skin. Our parents were from different royal lines, I said. Dad, he must have been descended from Nama, the first pharaoh. I told you he looked like that picture. That's not possible, Carter said. That was 5,000 years ago. But I could see his mind was racing. Then the Faust, he turned to Zia. Ramses the Great built this courtyard. You're telling me our mum's family is descended from him? Zia sighed. Don't tell me your parents kept this from you. Why do you think you're so dangerous to us? You think we're hosting gods, I said, absolutely stunned. That's what you're worried about, just because of something our great times 1,000 grandparents did? That's completely daft. Then prove it, Zia said. Do, and show me how weak your magic is. She turned her back on us, as if we were completely unimportant. Something inside me snapped. I'd had the worst 2 days ever. I'd lost my father, my home, and my cat, been attacked by monsters, and had ice water dumped on my head. Now this witch was turning her back on me. She didn't want to train us. She just wanted to see how dangerous we were. Well, fine. Sadie? Carter called. He must have seen from my expression that I was beyond reason. I focused on my staff. Maybe not fire. Cats have always liked me. Maybe. I threw my staff straight at Zia. It hit the ground at her heels. It immediately transformed into a snarling she-lion. Zia whirled in surprise, but then everything went wrong. The lion turned and charged at Carter, as if she knew I was supposed to be dueling him. I had a split second to think, what have I done? Then the cat lunged, and Carter's form flickered. He rose off the ground, surrounded by a golden hieroglyphic shell, like the one Bast had used, except this giant image was a warrior with the head of a falcon. Carter swung his sword, and the falcon warrior did likewise, slicing the lion with a shimmering blade of energy. The cat dissolved in midair, and my staff clattered to the ground, nearly cut in half. Carter's avatar shimmered, then disappeared. He dropped to the ground and grinned. Fun. He didn't even look tired. Once I got over my relief that I hadn't killed him, I realized I didn't feel tired either. If anything, I had more energy. I turned defiantly to Zia. Well, better, right? Her face was ashen. The falcon, he summoned. Before she could finish, footsteps pounded on the stones. A young initiate raced into the courtyard, looking panicked. Tears streaked his dusty face. He said something to Zia in hurried Arabic. When Zia got his message, she sat down hard in the sand. She covered her face and began to tremble. Carter and I left our dueling circles and ran to her. Zia, Carter said, what's wrong? She took a deep breath, trying to gather her composure. When she looked up, her eyes were red. She said something to the adept, who nodded and ran back the way he'd come. News from the first gnome, she said shakily. Iskander. Her voice broke. I felt as if a giant fist had punched me in the stomach. I thought about Iskander's strange words last night. It seems I, too, can rest at last. He's dead, isn't he? That's what he meant. Zia stared at me. What do you mean, that's what he meant? I was about to say that I'd spoken with Iskander the night before, then I realized this might not be a good thing to mention. Nothing. How did it happen? In his sleep, Zia said. He had been ailing for years, of course, but still. It's okay, Carter said. I know he was important to you. She wiped at her tears, then rose unsteadily. You don't understand. Desjardins is next in line. As soon as he is named Chief Lector, he will order you executed. But we haven't done anything, I said. Zia's eyes flashed with anger. You still don't realize how dangerous you are. You are hosting gods. Ridiculous, I insisted, but an uneasy feeling was building inside me, as if it were true. No, it couldn't be. Besides, how could anyone, even a proxy old nutter like Desjardins, seriously execute children for something they weren't even aware of? You order me to bring you in, Zia warned, and I will have to obey. You can't, Carter cried. You saw what happened in the museum. We're not the problem, Set is, and if Desjardins isn't taking that seriously, well, maybe he's part of the problem too. Zia gripped her staff. I was sure she was going to fry us with a fireball, but she hesitated. Zia, I decided to risk it. Iskander talked with me last night. He caught me sneaking around the Hall of Ages. She looked at me in shock. I reckoned that I only had seconds before that shock turned to anger. He said you were his best pupil, I recalled. He said you were wise. He also said Carter and I have a difficult path ahead of us, and you would know how to help us when the time came. Her staff smoldered. Her eyes reminded me of glass about to shatter. Desjardins will kill us, I persisted. Do you think that's what Iskander had in mind? I counted to 5, 6, 7. Just when I was sure she was going to blast us, she lowered her staff. Use the obelisk. What? I asked. The obelisk at the entrance, fool. You have 5 minutes, perhaps less, before Desjardins sent order for your execution. Flee and destroy Set. The demon days begin at sundown. Our portals will stop working. You need to get as close as possible to Set before that happens. Hold on, I said. I meant you should come with us and help us. We can't even use an obelisk, much less destroy Set. I cannot betray the house, she said. You have 4 minutes now. If you can't operate the obelisk, you'll die. That was enough incentive for me. I started to drag Carter off, but Zia called, Sadie? When I looked back, Zia's eyes were full of bitterness. Desjardins will order me to hunt you down, she warned. Do you understand? Unfortunately, I did. The next time we meet, we would be enemies. I grabbed Carter's hand and ran. Chapter 17. A bad trip to Paris. Okay, before I get to the demon fruit bats, I should back up. The night before we fled Luxor, I didn't get much sleep. First because of an out-of-body experience, and then a run-in with Zia. Stop smirking, Sadie. It wasn't a good run-in. After lights out, I tried to sleep. Honest. I even used the stupid magic headrest they gave me instead of a pillow, but it didn't help. As soon as I managed to shut my eyes, my ba decided to take a little trip. Just like before, I felt myself floating above my body, taking on a winged form. Then the current of the duat swept me away at blurring speed. When my vision cleared, I found myself in a dark cavern. Uncle Amos was sneaking through it, finding his way with a faint blue light that flickered on the top of his staff. I wanted to call to him, but my voice didn't work. I'm not sure how he could miss me, floating a few feet away in glowing chicken form, but apparently I was invisible to him. He stepped forward, and the ground at his feet suddenly blazed to life with a red hieroglyph. Amos cried out, but his mouth froze half open. Coils of light wrapped around his legs like vines. Soon, red tendrils completely entwined him, and Amos stood petrified, his unblinking eyes staring straight ahead. I tried to fly to him, but I was stuck in place, floating helplessly, so I could only observe. Laughter echoed through the cavern. A horde of things emerged from the darkness. Toad creatures, animal-headed demons, and even stranger monsters half hidden in the gloom. They'd been lying in ambush, I realized, waiting for Amos. In front of them appeared a fiery silhouette, Set. But his form was much clearer now, and this time it wasn't human. His body was emaciated, slimy and black, and his head was that of a feral beast. "Bonsoir, Amos," Set said. "How nice of you to come. We're going to have so much fun." I sat bolt upright in bed, back in my own body, with my heart pounding. Amos had been captured. I knew it for certain. And even worse, Set had known somehow that Amos was coming. I thought back to something Bast had said about how the Serpopards had broken into the mansion. She'd said the defenses had been sabotaged, and only a magician of the house could have done it. A horrible suspicion started building inside me. I stared into the dark for a long time, listening to the little kid next to me mumbling spells in his sleep. When I couldn't stand it any longer, I opened the door with a push of my mind, the way I'd done at Amos's mansion, and I sneaked out. I was wandering through the empty marketplace, thinking about Dad and Amos, replaying the events over and over, trying to figure out what I could have done differently to save them, when I spotted Zia. She was hurrying across the courtyard as if she were being chased, but what really caught my attention was the shimmering black cloud around her, as if someone had wrapped her in a glittery shadow. She came to a section of blank wall and waved her hand. Suddenly a doorway appeared. Zia glanced nervously behind her and ducked inside. Of course, I followed. I moved quietly up to the doorway. I could hear Zia's voice inside, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. Then the doorway began to solidify, turning back into a wall, and I made a split-second decision. I jumped through. Inside, Zia was alone with her back to me. She was kneeling at a stone altar, chanting something under her breath. The walls were decorated with ancient Egyptian drawings and modern photographs. The glittery shadow no longer surrounded Zia, but something even stranger was happening. I'd been planning to tell Zia about my nightmare, but that went completely out of my thoughts when I saw what she was doing. She cupped her palm, the way you might hold a bird, and a glowing blue sphere appeared, about the size of a golf ball. Still chanting, she raised her hands. The sphere flew up, straight through the ceiling, and vanished. Some instinct told me this was not something I was supposed to see. I thought about backing out of the room. Only problem? The door was gone. No other exits. It was only a matter of time before... Uh-oh. Maybe I'd made a noise. Maybe her magical senses had kicked in. But faster than I could react, Zia pulled her wand and turned on me, flames flickering down the edge of the boomerang. "Hi," I said nervously. Her expression turned from anger to surprise, then back to anger. "Carter, what are you doing here?" "Just walking around. I saw you in the courtyard, so..." "What do you mean you saw me?" "Well, you were running and you had this black shimmery stuff around you and..." "You saw that? Impossible." "Why? What was it?" She dropped her wand and the fire died. "I don't appreciate being followed, Carter." "Sorry. I thought you might be in trouble." She started to say something, but apparently changed her mind. "In trouble. That's true enough." She sat down heavily and sighed. In the candlelight, her amber eyes looked dark and sad. She stared at the photos behind the altar, and I realized she was in some of them. There she was as a little girl, standing barefoot outside a mud brick house, squinting resentfully at the camera as if she didn't want her picture taken. Next to her, a wider shot showed a whole village on the Nile, the kind of place my dad took me to sometimes, where nothing had changed much in the last 2,000 years. A crowd of villagers grinned and waved at the camera as if they were celebrating, and above them, little Zia rode on the shoulders of a man who must have been her father. Another photo was a family shot, Zia holding hands with her mother and father. They could have been any Falahin family anywhere in Egypt, but her dad had especially kindly twinkling eyes. I thought he must have had a good sense of humor. Her mom's face was unveiled, and she laughed as if her husband had just cracked a joke. "Your folks look cool," I said. "Is that home?" Zia seemed like she wanted to get angry, but she kept her emotions under control. Or maybe she just didn't have the energy. "It was my home. The village no longer exists." I waited, not sure I dared to ask. We locked eyes, and I could tell she was deciding how much to tell me. "My father was a farmer," she said, "but he also worked for archaeologists. In his spare time, he'd scour the desert for artifacts and new sites where they might want to dig." I nodded. What Zia described was pretty common. Egyptians have been making extra money that way for centuries. "One night, when I was 8, my father found a statue," she said. "Small, but very rare. A statue of a monster, carved from red stone. It had been buried in a pit with a lot of other statues that were all smashed, but somehow this one survived. He brought it home. He didn't realize magicians imprison monsters and spirits inside such statues and break them to destroy their essence. My father brought the unbroken statue into our village and accidentally unleashed..." Her voice faltered. She stared at the picture of her father smiling and holding her hand. "Zia, I'm sorry." She knit her eyebrows. "Iskander found me. He and the other magicians destroyed the monster, but not in time. They found me curled in a fire pit under some reeds where my mother had hidden me. I was the only survivor." I tried to imagine how Zia would have looked when Iskander found her. A little girl who'd lost everything, alone in the ruins of her village. It was hard to picture her that way. "So this room is a shrine to your family," I guessed. "You come here to remember them." Zia looked at me blankly. "That's the problem, Carter. I can't remember. Iskander tells me about my past. He gave me these pictures, explained what happened, but I have no memory at all." I was about to say you were only 8. Then I realized I'd been the same age when my mom died. when Sadie and I were split up. I remembered all of that so clearly. I could still see our house in Los Angeles and the way the stars looked at night from our back porch overlooking the ocean. My dad would tell us wild stories about the constellations. Then every night before bed, Sadie and I would cuddle up with Mom on the sofa, fighting for her attention, and she'd tell us not to believe a word of Dad's stories. She'd explain the science behind the stars, talk about physics and chemistry as if we were her college students. Looking back on it, I wondered if she'd been trying to warn us. Don't believe in those gods and myths. They're too dangerous. I remembered our last trip to London as a family. How nervous Mom and Dad seemed on the plane. I remembered our dad coming back to our grandparents' flat after Mom had died and telling us there had been an accident. Even before he explained, I knew it was bad because I'd never seen my dad cry before. The little details that did fade drove me crazy, like the smell of Mom's perfume or the way her voice sounded. The older I got, the harder I held on to those things. I couldn't imagine not remembering anything. How could Zia stand it? Maybe, I struggled to find the right words. Maybe you just... She held up her hand. Carter, believe me, I've tried to remember. It's no use. Iskander is the only family I've ever had. What about friends? Zia stared at me as if I'd used a foreign term. I realized I hadn't seen anyone close to our age in the first gnome. Everyone was either much younger or much older. I don't have time for friends, she said. Besides, when initiates turn 13, they're assigned to other gnomes around the world. I'm the only one who stayed here. I like being alone. It's fine. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. I'd said almost the same thing many times. When people asked me what it was like being homeschooled by my dad, didn't I miss having friends? Didn't I want a normal life? I like being alone. It's fine. I tried to picture Zia going to a regular public high school, learning a locker combination, hanging out in the cafeteria. I couldn't picture it. I imagined she would be as lost as I would. Tell you what, I said, after the testing, after the demon days, when things settle down, things won't settle down, I'm going to take you to the mall. She blinked. The mall? For what reason? To hang out, I said. We'll get some hamburgers, see a movie. Zia hesitated. Is this what you'd call a date? My expression must have been priceless because Zia actually cracked a smile. You look like a cow hit with a shovel. I just meant... She laughed, and suddenly it was easier to imagine her as a regular high school kid. I will look forward to this mall, Carter, she said. You are either a very interesting person or a very dangerous one. Let's go with interesting. She waved her hand and the door reappeared. Go now, and be careful. The next time you sneak up on me, you might not be so fortunate. At the doorway, I turned. Zia, what was that black shimmery stuff? Her smile faded. An invisibility spell. Only very powerful magicians are able to see through it. You should not have. She stared at me for answers, but I didn't have any. Maybe it was wearing off or something, I managed. And can I ask, the blue sphere? She frowned. The what? The thing you released that went into the ceiling. She looked mystified. I don't know what you mean. Perhaps the candlelight was playing tricks on your eyes. Awkward silence. Either she was lying to me, or I was going crazy, or I didn't know what. I realized I hadn't told her about my vision of Amos and Set, but I felt that I'd already pushed her as far as I could for one night. Okay, I said, good night. I made my way back to the dorm, but I didn't get to sleep again for a long time. Fast forward to Luxor. Maybe now you understand why I didn't want to leave Zia behind, and why I didn't believe Zia would actually hurt us. On the other hand, I knew she wasn't lying about Desjardins. That guy wouldn't think twice about turning us into escargot. And the fact that Set spoke French in my dream, bonsoir, Amos, was that just a coincidence? Or was something a lot worse going on? Anyway, when Sadie tugged on my arm, I followed. We ran out of the temple and headed for the obelisk. But naturally, it wasn't that simple. We're the Kane family. Nothing is ever that simple. Just as we reached the obelisk, I heard the slishing sound of a magic portal. About 100 yards down the path, a bald magician in white robes stepped out of a whirling sand vortex. Hurry, I told Sadie. I grabbed the staff rod from my bag and threw it to her. Since I cut yours in half, I'll stick with the sword. But I don't know what I'm doing, she protested, searching the obelisk's base as if she hoped to find a secret switch. The magician regained his balance and spit the sand out of his mouth. Then he spotted us. Stop! Yeah, I muttered, that's gonna happen. Paris, Sadie turned to me. You said the other obelisk is in Paris, right? Right. Not trying to rush you, but... The magician raised his staff and started chanting. I fumbled for the hilt of my sword. My legs felt like they were turning into butter. I wondered if I could pull off that hawk warrior thing again. That had been cool, but had also been just a duel. And the test at the Chasm Bridge, when I deflected those daggers, that hadn't seemed like me. Every time I'd drawn this sword so far, I'd had help. Zia had been there, or Bast. I'd never felt completely alone. This time, it was just me. I was crazy to think I could hold off a full-fledged magician. I was no warrior. Everything I knew about swords came from reading books. The history of Alexander the Great, the Three Musketeers, as if that could help. With Sadie occupied at the obelisk, I was on my own. No, you're not, said a voice inside me. Great, I thought. I'm on my own and going crazy. At the far end of the avenue, the magician called out, Serve the House of Life! But I got the feeling he wasn't talking to me. The air between us began to shimmer. Waves of heat flowed from the double line of sphinxes, making them look as if they were moving. Then I realized they were moving. Each one cracked down the middle, and ghostly apparitions appeared from the stone like locusts breaking out of their shells. Not all of them were in good shape. The spirit creatures from broken statues had missing heads or feet. Some limped along on only 3 legs, but at least a dozen attack sphinxes were in perfect condition, and they all came toward us, each one the size of a Doberman, made of milky white smoke and hot vapor. So much for the sphinxes being on our side. Soon, I warned Sadie. Paris, she called and raised her staff and wand. I want to go there now. 2 tickets. First class would be nice. The sphinxes advanced. The nearest one launched itself toward me, and with sheer luck, I managed to slice it in half. The monster evaporated into smoke, but it let out a blast of heat so intense, I thought my face was going to melt right off. 2 more sphinx ghosts loped toward me. A dozen more were only a few steps behind. I could feel my pulse pounding in my neck. Suddenly the ground shook. The sky darkened, and Sadie yelled, Yes! The obelisk glowed with purple light, humming with power. Sadie touched the stone and yelped. She was sucked inside and disappeared. Sadie! I yelled. In my moment of distraction, 2 of the sphinxes slammed into me, knocking me to the ground. My sword skittered away. My ribcage went crack, and my chest erupted in pain. The heat coming off the creatures was unbearable. It was like being crushed under a hot oven. I stretched out my fingers toward the obelisk, just a few inches too far. I could hear the other sphinxes coming, the magician chanting, "Hold him, hold him!" With my last bit of strength, I lurched toward the obelisk, every nerve in my body screaming with pain. My fingertips touched the base, and the world went black. Suddenly, I was lying on cold, wet stone. I was in the middle of a huge public plaza. Rain was pouring down, and the chilly air told me I was no longer in Egypt. Sadie was somewhere close by, yelling in alarm. The bad news? I'd brought the two sphinxes with me. One jumped off me and bounded after Sadie. The other was still on my chest, glaring down at me, its back steaming in the rain, its smoky white eyes inches from my face. I tried to remember the Egyptian word for fire. Maybe if I could set the monster ablaze. But my mind was too full of panic. I heard an explosion off to my right, in the direction Sadie had run. I hoped she'd gotten away, but I couldn't be sure. The Sphinx opened its mouth and formed smoky fangs that had no business on an ancient Egyptian king. It was about to chomp my face when a dark form loomed up behind it and shouted, "Mangez des muffins!" Slice. The sphinxes dissolved into smoke. I tried to rise but couldn't. Sadie stumbled over. "Carter, oh God, are you okay?" I blinked at the other person, the one who had saved me. A tall, thin figure in a black hooded raincoat. What did she yell? To eat muffins? What kind of a battle cry was that? She threw off her coat, and a woman in a leopard skin acrobatic suit grinned down at me, showing her fangs and her lamp-like yellow eyes. "Miss me?" asked Bast. Chapter 18. When Fruit Bats Go Bad. We huddled under the eaves of a big white government building and watched the rain pour down on the Place de la Concorde. It was a miserable day to be in Paris. The winter skies were heavy and low, and the cold, wet air soaked right into my bones. There were no tourists, no foot traffic. Everyone with any sense was inside by a fire enjoying a hot drink. To our right, the River Seine wound sluggishly through the city. Around the enormous plaza, the gardens of the Tuileries were shrouded in a soupy haze. The Egyptian obelisk rose up lonely and dark in the middle of the square. We waited for more enemies to pop out of it, but none came. I remembered what Zia had said about artifacts needing a 12-hour cooldown before they could be used again. I hoped she was right. "Hold still," Bast told me. I winced as she pressed her hand against my chest. She whispered something in Egyptian, and the pain slowly subsided. "Broken rib," she announced. "Better now, but you should rest for at least a few minutes." "What about the magicians?" "I wouldn't worry about them just yet. The house will assume you teleported somewhere else." "Why?" "Paris is the 14th gnome. Desjardins' headquarters. He would be insane trying to hide in his home territory." "Great," I sighed. "And your amulets do shield you," Bast added. "I could find Sadie anywhere because of my promise to protect her. But the amulets will keep you veiled from the eyes of Set and from other magicians." I thought about the dark room in the first gnome with all the children looking into bowls of oil. Were they looking for us right now? The thought was creepy. I tried to sit up and winced again. "Stay still," Bast ordered. "Really, Carter, you should learn to fall like a cat." "I'll work on that," I promised. "How are you even alive? Is that 9 lives a thing?" "Oh, that's just a silly legend. I'm immortal." "But the scorpions!" Sadie scrunched in closer, shivering, and drawing Bast's raincoat around her shoulders. "We saw them overwhelm you." Bast made a purring sound. "Dear Sadie, you do care." I must say I've worked for many children of the pharaohs, but you two." She looked genuinely touched. "Well, I'm sorry if I worried you. It's true, the scorpions reduced my power to almost nothing. I held them off as long as I could. Then I had just enough energy to revert to Muffin's form and slip into the duat." "I thought you weren't good at portals," I said. "Well, first off, Carter, there are many ways in and out of the duat. It has many different regions and layers. The abyss, the river of night, the land of the dead, the land of demons." "Sounds lovely," Sadie muttered. "Anyway, portals are like doors. They pass through the duat to connect to one part of the mortal world to another. And yes, I'm not good at those, but I am a creature of the duat. If I'm on my own, slipping into the nearest layer for a quick escape is relatively easy." "And if they killed you?" I asked. Killed Muffin?" "That would have banished me deep into the duat. It would have been rather like putting my feet in concrete and dropping me into the middle of the sea. It would have taken years, perhaps centuries, before I would have been strong enough to return to the mortal world. Fortunately, that didn't happen. I came back straight away, but by the time I got to the museum, the magicians had already captured you." "We weren't exactly captured," I said. "Really, Carter? How long were you in the First Gnome before they decided to kill you?" About 24 hours. Bass whistled. "They've gotten friendlier. They used to blast godlings to dust in the first few minutes." "We're not... Wait, what did you call us?" Sadie answered, sounding as if in a trance. "Goblings." "That's what we are, aren't we? That's why Zia was so frightened of us. Why Desjardins wants to kill us." Bast patted Sadie's knee. "You always were bright, dear." "Hold on," I said. "You mean host for gods? That's not possible. I think I'd know if..." Then I thought about the voice in my head, warning me to hide when I met Iskander. I thought about all the things I was suddenly able to do, like fight with a sword and summon a magical shell of armor. Those were not things I'd covered in home school. "Carter," Sadie said, "when the Rosetta Stone shattered, it let out 5 gods, right? Dad joined with Osiris. Amos told us that. Set, I don't know. He got away somehow. But you and I, the amulets protected us." I clutched the Eye of Horus around my neck. "Dad said they would." "If we had stayed out of the room, as Dad told us to," Sadie recalled. "But we were there, watching. We wanted to help him. We practically asked for power, Carter." Bass nodded. "That makes all the difference. An invitation. And since then," Sadie looked at me tentatively, almost daring me to make fun of her, "I've had this feeling, like a voice inside me." By now the cold rain had soaked right through my clothes. If Sadie hadn't said something, maybe I could have denied what was happening a little longer. But I thought about what Amos said about our family having a long history with the gods. And I thought about what Zia had told us about our lineage. The gods chose their host carefully. They always prefer the blood of the pharaohs. "Okay," I admitted. "I've been hearing a voice too. So either we're both going crazy..." "The amulet." Sadie pulled it from her shirt collar and held it for Bass to see. "It's a symbol of a goddess, isn't it?" I hadn't seen her amulet in a long time. It was different from mine. It reminded me of an ankh, or maybe some kind of fancy tie. "That's a tayet," Bass said, "a magic knot. And yes, it is often called the knot of Isis," Sadie said. I didn't see how she could know that, but she seemed absolutely certain. "In the Hall of Ages, I saw an image of Isis, and when I was Isis, trying to get away from Set, and... oh God, that's it, isn't it? I'm her." She grabbed her shirt like she practically wanted to pull the goddess away from her. All I could do was stare. My sister, with her red highlighted hair and her linen pajamas and her combat boots, how could she possibly worry about being possessed by a goddess? What goddess would want her? Is it maybe the goddess of chewing gum? But then, I'd been hearing a voice inside me too. A voice that was definitely not mine. I looked at my amulet, the Eye of Horus. I thought about the myths I knew. How Horus, the son of Osiris, had to avenge his father by defeating Set. And at Luxor I'd summoned an avatar with the head of a falcon. I was afraid to try it, but I thought, Horus? Well, it's about time, the other voice said. Hello, Carter. Oh no, I said, panic raising up in my chest. No. Somebody get a can opener. I've got a gut stuck in my head. Beth's eyes lit up. You communicated with Horus directly? That's excellent progress. Progress? I banged my palms against my head. Get him out. Calm down, Horus said. Don't tell me to calm down. Bass frowned. I didn't. Talking to him. I pointed at my forehead. This is awful, Sadie wailed. How do I get rid of her? Bass sniffed. First off, Sadie, you don't have all of her. Gods are very powerful. We can exist in many places at once. But yes, part of Isis' spirit now resides inside you. Just as Carter now carries the spirit of Horus. And frankly, you both should feel honored. Right, very honored, I said. Always wanted to be possessed. Bass rolled her eyes. Please, Carter, it's not possession. Besides, you and Horus want the same thing, to defeat Set, just as Horus did millennia ago, when Set first killed Osiris. If you don't, your father is doomed, and Set will become king of the earth. I glanced at Sadie, but she was no help. She ripped the amulet off her neck and threw it down. Isis got it through the amulet, didn't she? Well, I really wouldn't do that, Bass warned. But Sadie pulled out her wand and smashed the amulet. Blue sparks shot up from the ivory boomerang. Sadie yelped and dropped her wand, which was now smoking. Her hand was covered in black scorch marks. The amulet was fine. Ow, she said. Bass sighed. She put her hand on Sadie's, and the burn marks faded. I did tell you. Isis channeled her power through the amulet, yes, but she's not there now. She's in you. And even so, magical amulets are practically indestructible. So what are we supposed to do? Sadie said. Well, for starters, Bass said, Carter must use the power of Horus to defeat Set. Oh, is that all? I asked, all by myself. No, Sadie can help. Oh, super. I'll guide you as much as possible, Bass promised, but in the end, the two of you must fight. Only Horus and Isis can defeat Set and avenge the death of Osiris. That's the way it was before. That's the way it must be now. Then we get our dad back? I asked. Bass' smile wavered. If all goes well. She wasn't telling us everything, no surprise, but my brain was too fuzzy to figure out what I was missing. I looked down at my hands. They didn't seem any different, no stronger, no godlier. If I've got the powers of a god, then why am I so lame? Sadie offered. Shut up, I said. Why can't I use my powers better? Takes practice, Bass said. Unless you wish to give over control to Horus, then he would use your form and you would not have to worry. I could, a voice said inside me. Let me fight Set. You can trust me. Yeah, right, I told him. How could I be sure you wouldn't get me killed and just move on to some other host? How could I be sure you're not influencing my thoughts right now? I would not do that, the voice said. I chose you because of your potential, Carter, and because we have the same goal. Upon my honor, if you let me control... No, I said. I realized I'd spoke aloud. Sadie and Bast were both looking at me. I'm not giving up control, I said. This is our fight. Our dad's locked in a coffin. Our uncle's been captured. Captured? Sadie asked. I realized with a shock that I hadn't told her about my last little bar trip. There just hadn't been time. When I gave her the details, she looked stricken. God, no. Yeah, I agreed. And Set spoke in French. Bonsoir. Sadie, what you said about Set getting away, maybe he didn't. If he was just looking for a powerful host. Desjardins, Sadie finished. Bast growled deep in her throat. Desjardins was in London the night your father broke the Rosetta Stone, wasn't he? Desjardins has always been full of anger, full of ambition. In many ways, he would be the perfect host for Set. If Set managed to possess Desjardins' body, that would mean the Red Lord now controls the man who was chief lector of the house. By Ra's throne, Carter, I hope you're wrong. The two of you will have to learn to use the power of the gods quickly. Whatever Set is planning, he'll do it on his birthday, when he's the strongest. That's the third demon day, 3 days from now. But I've already used Isis's power, haven't I? Sadie asked. I've summoned hieroglyphs. I activated the obelisk at Luxor. Was that her or me? Both, dear, Bast said. You and Carter have great abilities on your own, but the power of the gods has hastened your development and given you an extra reservoir to draw on. What would have taken you years to learn, you've accomplished in days. The more you channel the power of the gods, the more powerful you will become. And the more dangerous it gets, I guessed. The magicians told us hosting gods can burn you out, kill you, drive you crazy. Bast fixed her eyes on me. Just for a second, they were the eyes of a predator. Ancient, powerful, dangerous. Not everyone can host a god, Carter. That's true. But you two are both blood of the pharaohs. You combine two ancient bloodlines. That's very rare, very powerful. And besides, if you think you can survive without the power of the gods, think again. Don't repeat your mother's... She stopped herself. What? Sadie demanded. What about our mother? I shouldn't have said that. Tell us, Cat. I was afraid Bast might unsheath her knives. Instead, she leaned against the wall and stared out at the rain. When your parents released me from Cleopatra's Needle, there was much more energy than they expected. Your father spoke the actual summoning spell, and the blast would have killed him instantly, but your mother threw up a shield. In that split second, I offered her my help. I offered to merge our spirits and help protect them, but she would not accept my help. She chose to tap her own reservoir, her own magic, Sadie murmured. Bast nodded sadly. When a magician commits herself to a spell, there's no turning back. If she overreaches her power, well, your mother used her last bit of energy protecting your father. To save him, she sacrificed herself. She literally burned up, I said. That's what Zia warned us about. The rain kept pouring down. I realized I was shivering. Sadie wiped a tear from her cheek. She picked up her amulet and glared at it resentfully. We've got to save Dad. If he's really got the spirit of Osiris... She didn't finish, but I knew what she was thinking. I thought about Mom when I was little. Her arm around my shoulders as we walked to the back deck of our house in L.A. She'd pointed out the stars to me. Polaris, Orion's Belt, Sirius. Then she'd smiled at me, and I'd feel like I was the most important thing, more than any constellation in the sky. My mom had sacrificed herself to save Dad's life. She'd used so much magic, she literally burned up. How could I ever be that brave? Yet I had to try to save Dad. Otherwise, I'd feel like Mom's sacrifice had been for nothing. And maybe if we could rescue Dad, he could set things right. even bring back our mom. Is that possible? I asked Horace, but his voice was silent. All right, I decided. So how do we stop Set? Bass thought for a moment, then smiled. I got the feeling that whatever she was about to suggest, I wasn't going to like it. There might be a way without completely giving yourself over to the gods. There's a book by Thoth, one of the rare spell books written by the god of wisdom himself. The one I'm thinking of details a way to overcome Set. It is the prized possession of a certain magician. All we need to do is sneak into his fortress, steal it, and leave before sunset, while we can still create a portal to the United States. Perfect, Sadie said. Hold up, I said. Which magician? And where's the fortress? Bass stared at me as if I were a bit slow. Why, I think we have already discussed him. Desjardins. His house is right here in Paris. Once I saw Desjardins' house, I hated him even more. It was a huge mansion on the other side of the Tuileries, on the Rue des Pyramides. Pyramids Road? Sadie said. Obvious much? Maybe he couldn't find a place on stupid evil magician street, I suggested. The house was spectacular. The spikes atop its wrought iron fence were gilded. Even in the winter rain, the front garden was bursting with flowers. 5 stories of white marble walls and black shuttered windows loomed before us. The whole thing topped off by a roof garden. I'd seen royal palaces smaller than this place. I pointed to the front door, which was painted red. Isn't red a bad color in Egypt? The color of Set? Bass scratched her chin. Now that you mention it, yes, it's the color of chaos and destruction. I thought black was the evil color, Sadie said. No, dear. As usual, modern folk have it backward. Black is the color of good soil, like the soil of the Nile. You can grow food in black soil. Food is good, therefore black is good. Red is the color of the desert sand. Nothing grows in the desert, therefore red is evil. She frowned. It is strange that Desjardins has a red door. Well, I'm excited, Sadie grumbled. Let's go knock. There will be guards, Bass said, and traps and alarms. You can bet the house is heavily charmed to keep out gods. Magicians can do that? I asked. I imagined a big can of pesticide labeled God away. Alas, yes, Bass said. I will not be able to cross the threshold uninvited. You, however. I thought we're gods too, Sadie said. That's the beauty of it, Bass said. As host, you are still quite human. I have taken full possession of Muffin, so I am pretty much me, a goddess. But you are still, well, yourselves. Clear? No, I said. I suggest you turn into birds, Bass said. You can fly into the roof garden and make your way in. Plus, I like birds. First problem, I said. We don't know how to turn into birds. Easily fixed, and a good test at channeling godly power. Both Isis and Horus have bird forms. Simply imagine yourself as birds, and birds you shall become. Just like that, Sadie said. You won't pounce on us? Chapter 19, A Picnic in the Sky. Right, Carter, give me the mic. So I'd been to the Louvre once before on holiday, but I hadn't been chased by vicious fruit bats. I would have been terrified, except I was a bit too busy being angry with Carter. I couldn't believe the way he treated my bird problem. Honestly, I thought I'd be a kite forever, suffocating inside a little feathery prison. And he'd have the nerve to make fun. I promised myself I'd get revenge, but for the time being we had enough worries staying alive. We raced along in the cold rain. It was all I could do to avoid slipping on the slick pavements. I glanced back and saw 2 figures chasing me, men with shaved heads and goatees and black raincoats. They might have passed for normal mortals, except They each carried a glowing staff. Not a good sign. The bats were literally at our heels. One nipped my leg. Another buzzed my hair. I had to force myself to keep running. My stomach still felt queasy from eating those little pests when I was a kite. And no, that had not been my idea. Totally a defensive instinct. Sadie, Bass called as we ran. You'll only have seconds to open the portal. Where is it? I yelled. We dashed across the Rue de Rivoli into a wide plaza surrounded by the wings of the Louvre. Bass made straight for the glass pyramid at the entrance, glowing in the dusk. You can't be serious, I said. That isn't a real pyramid. Of course it's real, Bass said. The shape gives a pyramid its power. It is a ramp to the heavens. The bats were all around us now, biting our arms, flying around our feet. As their numbers increased, it got harder to see or move. Carter reached for his sword, then apparently remembered it wasn't there anymore. He'd lost it at Luxor. He swore and rummaged around in his work bag. Don't slow down, Bass warned. Carter pulled out his wand. In total frustration, he threw it at a bat. I thought this a pointless gesture, but the wand glowed white-hot and thumped the bat solidly on the head, knocking it out of the air. The wind ricocheted through the swarm, thumping 6, 7, 8 of the little monsters before returning to Carter's hand. Not bad, I said. Keep it up. We arrived at the base of the pyramid. The plaza was thankfully empty. The last thing I wanted was my embarrassing death by fruit bats to be posted on YouTube. 1 minute until sundown, Bass warned. Our last chance for summoning is now. She unsheathed her knives and started slicing bats out of the air, trying to keep them away from me. Carter's wand flew wildly, knocking fruit bats every which way. I faced the pyramid and tried to think of a portal, the way I'd done at Luxor, but it was almost impossible to concentrate. Where do you wish to go? Isis asked in my mind. God, I don't care. Anywhere. America. I realized I was crying. I hated to, but shock and fear was starting to overwhelm me. Where did I want to go? Home, of course. Back to my flat in London. Back to my room, my grandparents, my mates at school, and my old life. But I couldn't. I had to think about my father and our mission. We had to get set. America, I thought, now. My burst of emotion must have had some effect. The pyramid trembled, its glass walls shimmered, and the top of the structure began to glow. A swirling sand vortex appeared. All right. Only one problem. It was hovering above the very top of the pyramid. Climb, Bass said. Easy for her. She was a cat. The side is too steep, Carter objected. He'd done a good job with the bats. Dazed heaps littered the pavement. But more still flew around us, biting every bit of exposed skin, and the magicians were closing in. I'll toss you, Bass said. Excuse me? Carter protested, but she picked him up by his collar and pants and tossed him up the side of the pyramid. He skidded to the top in a very undignified manner and slipped straight through the portal. Now you, Sadie, Bass said. Come on. Before I could move, a man's voice yelled, Stop! Stupidly, I froze. The voice was so powerful it was hard not to. The two magicians were approaching. The taller one spoke in perfect English. Surrender, Miss Kane, and return our master's property. Sadie, don't listen, Bass warned. Come here. The cat goddess deceives you, the magician said. She abandoned her post. She endangered us all. She will lead you to ruin. I could tell he meant it. He was absolutely convinced of what he'd said. I turned to Bast. Her expression had changed. She looked wounded, even grief-stricken. What does he mean? I said. What did you do wrong? We have to leave, she warned, or they will kill us. I looked at the portal. Carter was already through. That decided it. I wasn't going to be separated from him. As annoying as he was, Carter was the only person I had left. How was that for depressing? Toss me, I said. Bass grabbed me. See you in America. Then she chucked me up the side of the pyramid. I heard the magician roar, "Surrender!" and an explosion rattled the glass near my head. Then I plunged into the hot vortex of sand. I woke in a small room with industrial carpeting, grey walls, and a metal-framed window. I felt as if I were inside a high-tech refrigerator. I sat up groggily and discovered I was coated in cold, wet sand. "Ugh," I said, "where are we?" Carter and Bass stood by the window. Apparently they'd been conscious for a while, because they both brushed themselves off. "You've got to see this view," Carter said. I got shakily to my feet and nearly fell down again when I saw how high we were. An entire city spread out below us. I mean far below. Well over 100 meters. I could almost believe we were still in Paris, because the river curved off to the left, and the land was mostly flat. There were white government buildings clustered around networks of parks and circular roads, all spread out under a winter sky. But the light was wrong. It was still afternoon here, so we must have travelled west. And as my eyes made their way to the other end of a long rectangular green space, I found myself staring at a mansion that looked oddly familiar. "Is that the White House?" Carter nodded. "You got us to America, all right. Washington, D.C. "But we're sky high," Bass chuckled. "You didn't specify any particular American city, did you?" "Well, no." "So you got the default portal for the US, the largest single source of Egyptian power in North America." I stared at her uncomprehendingly. "The biggest obelisk ever constructed," she said. "The Washington Monument." I had another moment of vertigo and moved away from the window. Carter grabbed my shoulder and helped me sit down. "You should rest," he said. "You passed out for how long, Bass?" 2 hours and 32 minutes, she said. "I'm sorry, Sadie. Opening more than one portal a day is extremely taxing, even with ISIS's help." Carter frowned. "But we needed to do it again, right? It's not sunset here yet. We could still use portals. Let's open one and get to Arizona. That's what Set is." Bass pursed her lips. Sadie can't summon another portal. It would overextend her powers. I don't have the talent. And you, Carter, well, your abilities lies elsewhere. No offense. "Oh no," we grumbled. "I'm sure you'll call me next time you need to boomerang some fruit bats." "Besides," Bass said, "when a portal is used, it needs time to cool down. No one will be able to use the Washington Monument for another 12 hours. Carter cursed. "I forgot about that." Bass nodded. "And by then, the demon days will have begun." "So we need another way to Arizona," Carter said. I suppose he didn't mean to make me feel guilty, but it did. I hadn't thought things through, and now we're stuck in Washington. I glanced at Bass out of the corner of my eye. I wanted to ask her what the men at the Louvre had meant about her leading us to ruin, but I was afraid to. I wanted to believe she was on our side. Perhaps if I gave her a chance, she'd volunteer the information. "At least those magicians can't follow us," I prompted. Bast hesitated. "Not through the portal, no. But there are other magicians in America. And worse. Set's minions." My heart climbed into my throat. The House of Life was scary enough, but when I remembered Set and what his minions had done to Amos's house... "What about Thoth's spell book?" I said. "Did we at least find a way to fight Set?" Carter pointed to the corner of the room. Spread out on Bass' raincoat was Dad's magic toolbox and the blue book we'd stolen from Desjardins. "Maybe you can make sense of it," Carter said. Bass and I couldn't read it. Even Doughboy was stumped. I picked up the book, which was actually a fool scrawled it into sections. The papyrus was so brittle I was afraid to touch it. Hieroglyphs and illustrations crowded the page, but I couldn't make sense of them. My ability to read the language seemed to be switched off. "Isis," I asked, "a little help?" Her voice was silent. Maybe I had worn her out. Or maybe she was cross with me for not letting her take over my body, the way Horace had asked Carter to do. Selfish of me, I know. I closed the book in frustration. All that work for nothing. Now, Bass said, it's not so bad. Right, I said, we're stuck in Washington, D.C. We have 2 days to make it to Arizona and stop a god we don't know how to stop. And if we can't, we'll never see our dad or Amos again, and the world might end. That's the spirit, Bass said brightly. Now let's have a picnic. She snapped her fingers. The air shimmered, and a pile of Friskies cans and 2 jugs of milk appeared on the carpet. Carter said, can you conjure any people food? Boss blinked. Well, no accounting for taste. The air shimmered again. A plate of grilled cheese sandwiches and crisps appeared, along with a 6-pack of Coke. Yum, I said. Carter muttered something under his breath. I suppose grilled cheese wasn't his favourite, but he picked up a sandwich. We should leave soon, he said between bites. I mean, tourists and all. Bass shook her head. The Washington Monument closes at 6 o'clock. The tourists are gone now. We might as well stay the night. If we travel during the demon days, best to do it in daylight hours. We must have all been exhausted because we didn't talk again until we'd finished our food. I ate 3 sandwiches and drank 2 Cokes. Bass made the whole place smell like fish Friskies, then started licking her hand as if preparing for a cat bath. Could you not do that? I asked. It's disturbing. Oh, she smiled. Sorry. I closed my eyes and leaned against the wall. It felt good to rest, but I realized that the room wasn't actually quiet. The entire building seemed to be humming ever so slightly, sending a tremble through my skull that made my teeth buzz. I opened my eyes and sat up. I could still feel it. What is that? I asked. The wind? Magic energy, Bass said. I told you, this is a powerful monument. But it's modern, like the Louvre pyramid. Why is it magic? The ancient Egyptians were excellent builders, Sadie. They picked shapes, obelisks, pyramids, that were charged with symbolic magic. An obelisk represents a sunbeam frozen in stone, a life-giving ray from the original king of the gods, Ra. It doesn't matter when the structure was built, it is still Egyptian. That's why any obelisk can be used for opening gates to the Duat, or releasing great beings of power. Or trapping them, I said, the way you were trapped in Cleopatra's Needle. Her expression darkened. I wasn't actually trapped in the obelisk. My prison was a magically created abyss deep in the Duat, and the obelisk was the door your parents used to release me. But yes, all symbols of Egypt are concentrated nodes of magic power, so an obelisk can definitely be used to imprison gods. An idea was nagging at the back of my mind, but I couldn't quite pin it down. Something about my mother and Cleopatra's Needle, and my father's last promise in the British Museum. I'll put things right. Then I thought about the Louvre and the comet the magician had made. Bass looked so cross at the moment I was almost afraid to ask, but it was the only way I'd get an answer. The magician said you abandoned your post. What did he mean? Carter frowned. When was this? I told them what had happened after Bass chucked him through the portal. Bass stacked her empty Friskies can. She didn't look eager to reply. When I was imprisoned, she said at last, I wasn't alone. I was locked inside with a creature of chaos. Is that bad? I asked. Judging from Bass's expression, the answer was yes. Magicians often do this, lock a guard up together with a monster, so we have no time to try escaping our prison. For eons I fought this monster. When your parents released me, the monster got out. Bass hesitated a little too long for my taste. No, my enemy couldn't have escaped. She took a deep breath. Your mother's final act of magic sealed that gate. The enemy was still inside, but that's what the magician meant. As far as he was concerned, my post was battling that monster forever. I had the ring of truth, as if she were sharing a painful memory, but it didn't explain the other bit the magician had said. She endangered us all. I was getting up the nerve to ask exactly what the monster had been when Bart stood up. I should go scout, she said abruptly. I'll be back. We listened to her footsteps echo down the stairwell. She's hiding something, Carter said. Work that out yourself, did you? I asked. He looked away, and immediately I felt bad. I'm sorry, I said. It's just, what are we going to do? Rescue Dad. What else can we do? He picked up his wand and turned it in his fingers. Do you think you really meant to, bring Mom back? I wanted to say yes, more than anything. I wanted to believe that was possible, but I found myself shaking my head. Something about it didn't seem right. Iskander told me something about Mum, I said. She was a diviner. She could see the future. He said she made him rethink some old ideas. It was my first chance to tell Carter about my conversation with the old magician, so I gave him the details. Carter knit his eyebrows. You think that has something to do with why Mom died? She saw something in the future. I don't know. I tried to think back to when I was 6, but my memory was frustratingly fuzzy. When they took us to England the last time, did she and Dad seem like they were in a hurry? Like they were doing something really important? Definitely. Would you say freeing Bass was really important? I mean, I love her, of course, but was dying for her important? Carter hesitated. Probably not. Well, there you are. I think Mum and Dad were up to something bigger, something they didn't complete. Possibly that's what Dad was after at the British Museum, completing the task, whatever it was, making things right. And this whole business about our family going back 1 billion years to some god-hosting pharaohs. Why didn't anyone tell us? Why didn't Dad? Carter didn't answer for a long time. Maybe Dad was protecting us, he said. The House of Life doesn't trust our family, especially after what Dad and Mom did. Amos said we were raised apart for a reason, so we wouldn't, trigger each other's magic. Bloody awful reason to keep us apart, I muttered. Carter looked at me strangely, and I realized what I'd said may have been construed as a compliment. I just mean they should have been honest, I rushed on. Not that I wanted more time with my annoying brother, of course. He nodded seriously. Of course. We sat listening to the magic hum of the obelisk. I tried to remember the last time Carter and I had simply spent time together, talking. Is your, I tapped the side of my head, your friend being any help? Not much, he admitted. Yours? I shook my head. Carter, are you scared? A little. He dug his wand into the carpet. No, a lot. I looked at the blue book we'd stolen, pages full of wonderful secrets I couldn't read. What if we can't do it? I don't know, he said. That book about mastering the elements of cheese would have been more helpful. Or summoning fruit bats. Please, not the fruit bats. We shared a weary smile, but it felt rather good. But it changed nothing. We were still in serious trouble with no clear plan. Why don't you sleep on it? He suggested. You used a lot of energy today. I'll keep watch until Bass gets back. He actually sounded concerned for me. How cute. I didn't want to sleep. I didn't want to miss anything, but I realized my eyelids were incredibly heavy. All right then, I said. Don't let the bed bugs bite. I lay down to sleep, but my soul, my bar, had other ideas. Chapter 20. I visit the Star-Spangled goddess. I hadn't realized how unsettling it would be. Carter had explained how his bar had left his body while he slept, but having it happen to me was another thing altogether. It was much worse than my vision. than my vision in the Hall of Ages. There I was, floating in the air as a glowing bird-like spirit, and there was my body below me, fast asleep. Just trying to describe it gives me a headache. I first thought as I gazed down on my sleeping form, God, I look awful. Bad enough looking in a mirror, seeing pictures of myself on my friends' web pages. Seeing myself in person was simply wrong. My hair was a rat's nest, the linen pajamas were not in the least flattering, and the spot on my chin was enormous. The second thought as I examined the strange, shimmering form of my bar, this won't do at all. I didn't care if I was invisible to the mortal eye or not. After my bad experience as a kite, I simply refused to go about as a glowing, sadie-headed chicken. That's fine for Carter, but I have my standards. I could feel the currents of the duat tugging at me, trying to pull my bar to wherever souls go when they have visions, but I wasn't ready. I concentrated hard and imagined my normal appearance. Well, all right, perhaps my appearance as I'd like it to be, a bit better than normal. And voila, my bar morphed into a human form, still see-through and glowing, mind you, but more like a proper ghost. Well, at least that's sorted, I thought, and I allowed the currents to sweep me away. The world melted to black. At first I was nowhere, just a dark void. Then a young man stepped out of the shadows. You again, he said. I stammered, Honestly, you know me well enough by now. That's not like me. But this was the boy I'd seen in my Hall of Ages vision. The very handsome boy, with the black robes and tousled hair. His dark brown eyes had the most unnerving effect on me, and I was very glad I'd changed out of my glowing chicken outfit. I tried again and managed 3 entire words. What are you doing here? He said, gallantly finishing my sentence. Spirit travel and death are very similar. Not sure what that means, I said. Should I be worried? He tilted his head as if considering the question. Not this trip. She only wants to talk to you. Go ahead. He waved his hand in a doorway open in the darkness. I was pulled towards it. See you again? I asked. But the boy was gone. I found myself standing in a luxurious flat in the middle of the sky. I had no walls, no ceiling, and a see-through floor looking straight down at city lights from the height of an airplane. Clouds drifted below my feet. The air should have been freezing cold and too thin to breathe, but I felt warm and comfortable. Black leather sofas made a U round a glass coffee table on a blood-red rug. A fire burned in a slate fireplace. Bookshelves and paintings hovered in the air where the walls should have been. A black granite bar stood in the corner, and in the shadows behind it, a woman was making tea. Hello, my child, she said. She stepped into the light and I gasped. She wore an Egyptian kilt from the waist down. From the waist up, she wore only a bikini top, and her skin was dark blue, covered with stars. I don't mean painted stars. She had the entire cosmos living on her skin. Gleaming constellations, galaxies too bright to look at, glowing nebula of pink and blue dust. Her features seemed to disappear into the stars that shifted across her face. Her hair was long and as black as midnight. You're the nut, I said. Then I realized maybe that had come out wrong. I mean, the sky goddess. The goddess smiled. Her bright white teeth were like new galaxies bursting into existence. Newt is fine, and believe me, I've heard all the jokes about my name. She poured a second cup from a teapot. Let's sit and talk. Care for some salad? It's not tea? No, an Egyptian drink. You've heard of hot chocolate? This is rather like hot vanilla. I would have preferred tea, as I hadn't had a proper cup in ages, but I suppose one didn't turn down a goddess. Yeah, thanks. We sat together on the sofa. To my surprise, my glowing spirity hands had no trouble holding a teacup, and I could drink quite easily. The salad was sweet and tasty, and just a hint of cinnamon and coconut. It warmed me up nicely and filled the air with the smell of vanilla. For the first time in days, I felt safe. Then I remembered I was only here in spirit. Newt set her cup down. I suppose you're wondering why I brought you here. Where is here, exactly? And who's your doorman? I hoped she'd drop some information about the boy in black, but she only smiled. I must keep my secrets, dear. I can't have the House of Life trying to find me. Let's just say I built this home with a nice city view. Is that... I gestured to a starry blue skin. Are you inside a human host? No, dear. The sky itself is my body. This is merely a manifestation. But I thought, gods need a physical host outside the duat? It's somewhat easier for me, being a spirit of the air. I was one of the few gods who was never imprisoned, because the House of Life could never catch me. I'm used to being freeform. Suddenly, Newt and the entire apartment flickered. I felt like I would drop through the floor, but the sofa became stable again. Please don't do that again, I begged. My apologies, Newt said. The point is, each god is different, but all my brethren are free now, all finding places in this modern world of yours. They won't be imprisoned again. The magicians won't like that. No, Newt agreed. That's the first reason you're here. A battle between the gods and the House of Life would serve only chaos. You must make the magicians understand this. They won't listen to me. They think I'm a godling. You are a godling, dear. She touched my hair gently, and I felt Isis stirring within me, struggling to keep using my voice. I'm Sadie Kane, I said. I didn't ask for Isis to hitch a ride. The gods have known your family for generations, Sadie. In the olden days, we worked together for the benefit of Egypt. The magicians said that gods caused the fall of the empire. That is a long and pointless debate, Newt said, and I could hear an edge of anger in her voice. All empires fall. But the idea of Egypt is eternal. The triumph of civilization, the forces of Ma'at, overcoming the forces of chaos. That battle is fought generation after generation. Now it's your turn. I know, I said. We have to defeat Set. But is that so simple, Sadie? Set is my son too. In the old days, he was Ra's strongest lieutenant. He protected the sun god's boat from the serpent Apophis. Now there was evil. Apophis was the embodiment of chaos. He hated creation from the moment the first mountain appeared out of the sea. He hated the gods, mortals, and everything they built. And yet, Set fought against him. Set was one of us. Then he turned evil. Newt shrugged. Set has always been Set, for better or worse, but he is still part of our family. It is difficult to lose any member of your family, is it not? My throat tightened. That's hardly fair. Don't speak to me of fairness, Newt said. For 5,000 years I have been kept apart from my husband Geb. I vaguely remembered Carter saying something about this, and it seemed different listening to her now, hearing the pain in her voice. What happened? I asked. Punishment for bearing my children, she said bitterly. I disobeyed Ra's wishes, and so he ordered my own father, Shu. Hang on, I said. Shu? S-H-U, she said, the god of the wind. Oh, I wish these gods had names that weren't common household objects. Go on, please. Ra ordered my father Shu to keep us apart forever. I am exiled to the sky, while my beloved Geb cannot leave the ground. What happens if you try? Newt closed her eyes and spread her hands. A hole opened where she was sitting, and she fell through the air. Instantly, the clouds below us flickered with lightning. Winds raged across the flat, throwing books off the shelves, ripping away paintings and flinging them into the void. My teacup leaped out of my hand. I grabbed the sofa to avoid getting blown away myself. Below me, lightning struck Newt's form. The wind pushed her violently upwards, shooting past me. Then the winds died. Newt sailed back onto the couch. She waved her hand, and the flat repaired itself. Everything returned to normal. That happens, she said sadly. Oh. She gazed at the city lights far below. It has given me appreciation for my children, even Seth. He's done horrible things, yes, it is his nature, but he is still my son, and still one of the gods. He acts his part. Perhaps the way to defeat him is not the way you would imagine. Hints, please? Seek out Thoth. He has a new home in Memphis. Memphis, Egypt? Newt smiled. Memphis, Tennessee. Although the old bird probably thinks it's in Egypt. He so rarely takes a break out of his books, I would doubt he would know the difference. You'll find him there. He can advise you, but be wary, though. Thoth often asks for favors. He is sometimes hard to predict. Getting used to that, I said. How are we supposed to get there? I am the god of the sky. I can guarantee you safe travel as far as Memphis. She waved her hand, and a folder appeared in my lap. Inside were 3 plane tickets, Washington to Memphis, first class. I raised my eyebrow. I suppose you get a lot of frequent flyer miles. Something like that, Newt agreed. But as you get closer to Set, you will be beyond my help, and I could not protect you on the ground. Which reminds me, you need to wake up soon. Set's minion is closing in on your hideout. I sat straight up. How soon? Minutes. Send my spirit back then. I pinched my ghostly arm, which hurt just like it would in my normal arm, but nothing happened. Soon, Sadie, Newt promised. But 2 more things you must know. I had 5 children during the demon days. If your father released all of them, you should consider. Where is the 5th? I racked my brain, trying to remember the names of all of Newt's 5 children. Bit difficult without my brother, the human Wikipedia, around to keep track of such trivia for me. There was Osiris, the king, and Isis, his queen, Set, the evil god, and Horus, the avenger. But the 5th child of Newt, the one Carter said he could never remember. Then I recalled my vision in the Hall of Ages, Osiris's birthday, and the woman in blue who'd help Isis escape Set. You mean Nephthys, Set's wife? Consider it, Newt said. And lastly, a favor. She opened her hand and produced an envelope sealed with red wax. If you see Geb, will you give him this? I had been asked to pass notes before, but never between gods. Honestly, Newt's anguished expression was no different than those of my love-struck friends back at school. I wondered if she'd written in her notebooks, Geb plus Newt equals true love, or Mrs. Geb. Least I can do, I promised. Now, about sending me back. Safe travels, Sadie, the goddess said. And Isis, restrain yourself. The spirit of Isis rumbled inside me, as if I'd eaten a bad curry. Wait, I said, what do you mean restraint? But before I could finish, my vision went black. I snapped awake, back in my own body at the Washington Monument. Leave now! Carter and Bass jumped in surprise. They were already awake, packing their things. What's wrong? Carter asked. I told them about my vision while I frantically searched my pockets. Nothing. I checked my magician's bag, tucked inside with my wand and rod were 3 plane tickets and a sealed envelope. Boss exclaimed the tickets. Excellent! First class serves salmon. But what about Set's minion? I asked. Carter glanced out the window. His eyes widened. Yeah, it's here. Chapter 21. Aunt Kitty to the rescue. I'd seen pictures of the creature before, but pictures didn't come close to capturing how horrible it was in real life. "The set animal," Bass said, confirming my fear. Far below, the creature prowled the base of the monument, leaving tracks in the new-fallen snow. I had trouble judging its size, but it must have been at least as big as a horse, with legs just as long. It had an unnaturally lean, muscled body with shiny reddish-gray fur. You could almost mistake it for a huge greyhound, except for the tail and the head. The tail was reptilian, forked at the end with triangular points, like squid tentacles. It lashed around as if it had a mind of its own. The creature's head was the strangest part. Its oversized ears stuck straight up like rabbit ears, but they were shaped more like ice cream cones, curled inward and wider at the top than the bottom. They could rotate almost 360 degrees so they could hear anything. The creature's snout was long and curved like an anteater's. Only anteaters don't have razor-sharp teeth. "Its eyes are glowing," I said. "That can't be good." "How can you see that far?" Sadie demanded. She stood next to me, squinting at the tiny figure in the snow, and I realized she had a point. The animal was at least 500 feet below us. How was I able to see its eyes? "You still have the sight of the falcon," Bass guessed. "And you're right, Carter. The glowing eyes mean the creature has caught our scent." I looked at her and almost jumped out of my skin. Her hair was sticking straight up, all over her head, like she'd stuck her finger in a light socket. Bast?" I asked. "What?" Sadie and I exchanged looks. She mouthed the word scared. Then I remembered how Muffin's tail would always poof up when something startled her. "Nothing," I said. Though if the set animal was so dangerous that it gave our goddess light socket hair, that had to be a very bad sign. "How do we get out of here?" "You don't understand," Bass said. "The set animal is the perfect hunter. If it has our scent, there is no stopping it." "Why is it called the set animal?" Sadie asked nervously. "Doesn't it have a name?" "If it did," Bass said, "you would not want to speak it. It is merely known as the set animal. The Red Lord's symbolic creature. It shares his strength, cunning, and his evil nature." "Lovely," Sadie said. The animal sniffed at the monument and recoiled, snarling. "It doesn't seem to like the obelisk," I noticed. "No," Bass said. "Too much Ma'at energy, but that won't hold it back for long." As if on cue, the set animal leaped onto the side of the monument and began climbing like a lion scaling a tree, digging its claws into the stone. "That's messed up," I said. "Elevator or stairs?" "Both are too slow," Bass said. "Back away from the window." She unsheathed her knives and sliced through the glass. She punched out the window, setting off alarm bells. Freezing air blasted into the observation room. "You'll need to fly," Bass yelled over the wind. "It's the only way." "No." Sadie's face went pale. "Not the kite again." "Sadie, it's okay," I said. She shook her head, terrified. I grabbed her hand. "I'll stay with you." "I'll make sure you turn back." "The set animal is halfway up," Bass warned. "We're running out of time." Sadie glanced at Bass. "What about you? You can't fly." "I'll jump," she said. "Cats always land on their feet." "It's over 100 meters," Sadie cried. 170, Bass said. "I'll distract the set animal, buy you some time." "You'll be killed." Sadie's voice sounded close to breaking. "Please, I can't lose you too." Bass looked a little surprised. Then she smiled and put her hand on Sadie's shoulder. "I'll be fine, dear. Meet me at Reagan International. Terminal A. Be ready to run." Before I could argue, Bass jumped out the window. My heart just about stopped. She plummeted straight towards the pavement. I was sure she'd die, but as she fell, she spread her arms and legs and seemed to relax. She hurtled straight past the set animal, which let out a horrible scream like a wounded man on a battlefield, then turned and leaped after her. Bast hit the ground with both feet and took off running. She must have been doing 60 miles an hour easy. The set animal wasn't as agile and crashed so hard the pavement cracked. It stumbled a few steps but didn't seem hurt. Then it loped after Bast and was soon gaining on her. "She won't make it," Sadie fretted. "Never bet against a cat," I said. "We've got to do our part. Ready?" She took a deep breath. "All right, before I change my mind." Instantly, a black-winged kite appeared in front of me, flapping its wings to keep its balance in the intense wind. I willed myself to become a falcon. It was even easier than before. A moment later, we soared into the cold morning air over Washington, D.C. Finding the airport was easy. Reagan International was so close. I could see the planes landing across the Potomac. The hard part was remembering what I was doing. Every time I saw a mouse or a squirrel, I instinctively veered toward it. A couple of times I caught myself about to dive and I had to fight the urge. Once I looked over and realized I was a mile away from Sadie, who was off doing her own hunting. I had to force myself to fly next to her and get her attention. "It takes willpower to stay human," the voice of Horace warned. "The more you spend as a bird of prey, the more you think like one." "Now you tell me," I thought. "I could help," he urged. "Give me control." "Not today, birdhead." Finally, I steered Sadie toward the airport, and we started hunting for a place to change back to human form. We landed at the top of a parking garage. I willed myself to turn human. Nothing happened. Panic started building in my throat. I closed my eyes and pictured my dad's face. I thought about how much I missed him, how much I needed to find him. When I opened my eyes, I was back to normal. Unfortunately, Sadie was still a kite. She flapped around me and cawed frantically. "Ha, ha, ha!" There was a wild look in her eyes, and this time I understand how scared she was. Bird form had been hard enough for her to break out of the first time. If the second time took even more energy, she could be in serious trouble. "It's all right." I crouched down, carefully, to move slowly. "Sadie, don't force it. You have to relax." "Ha!" She tucked in her wings. Her chest was heaving. "Listen, it helped me to focus on Dad. Remember what's important to you. Close your eyes and think about your human life." She closed her eyes, but almost instantly cried out in frustration and flapped her wings. "Stop," I said. "Don't fly away." She tilted her head and gurgled in a pleading way. I started talking to her the way I would to a scared animal. I wasn't really paying attention to the words. I was just trying to keep my tone calm. After a minute, I realized I was telling her about my travels with Dad and the memories that had helped me to get out of bird form. I told her about the time Dad and I got stuck in the Venice airport and I ate so much cannoli I got sick. I told her about the time in Egypt when I found the scorpion in my sock and Dad managed to kill it with a TV remote control. I told her how we'd gotten separated once in the London Underground and how scared I was until Dad finally found me. I told her some pretty embarrassing stories that I'd never shared with anyone, because who would I share them with? And it seemed to me that Sadie listened. At least she stopped flapping her wings. Her breathing slowed, she became very still, and her eyes didn't look so panicked. "Okay, Sadie," I said at last, "I've got an idea. Here's what we're going to do." I took Dad's magic box out of its leather bag. I wrapped the bag around my forearm and tied it with the straps as best I could. "Hop on." Sadie flew up and perched at my wrist. Even with the makeshift arm guard, her talons dug into my skin. "We'll get you out of this," I said. "Keep trying. Relax and focus on your human life. You'll figure it out, Sadie. I know you will. I'll carry you until then." "Ha!" "Come on," I said. "Let's find Bast." With my sister perched on my arm, I walked to the elevator. A businessman with a rolling suitcase was waiting by the doors. His eyes widened when he saw me. I must have looked pretty strange. A tall black kid in dirty, ragged Egyptian clothes, with a weird box tucked under one arm and a bird of prey on the other. "How's it going?" I said. "I'll take the stairs." He hurried off. The elevator took me to the ground level. Sadie and I crossed to the departures curb. I looked around desperately, hoping to see Bast, but instead, I caught the attention of a curbside policeman. The guy frowned and started lumbering in my direction. "Stay calm," I told Sadie, resisting the urge to run. I turned and walked through the revolving doors. Here's the thing. I always get a little edgy around police. I remember when I was like 7 or 8 and still a cute little kid, it wasn't a problem. But as soon as I hit 11, I started to get the look. Like, what's that kid doing here? Is he going to steal something? I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's a fact. I'm not saying it happens with every police officer, but when it doesn't happen, let's just say it's a pleasant surprise. This was not one of the pleasant times. I knew the cop was going to follow me, and I knew I had to act calm and walk like I had a purpose, which is not easy with a kite on your arm. Christmas vacation, so the airport was pretty full. Mostly families standing in line at the ticket counters, kids arguing and parents labeling luggage. I wondered what that would be like, a normal family trip. No magic problems or monsters chasing you. Stop it, I told myself. You've got work to do. But I didn't know where to go. Would Bass be inside security? Outside? The crowds parted as I walked through the terminal. People stared at Sadie. I knew I couldn't wander around looking lost. It was only a matter of time before the cops. "Young man." I turned. It was the police officer from outside. Sadie squawked, and the cop backed up, resting his hand on his nightstick. "You can't have pets in here," he told me. "I have tickets." I tried to reach my pockets. Then I remembered that Bast had our tickets. The cop scowled. "You'd better come with me." Suddenly, a woman's voice called, "There you are, Carter!" Bast was hurrying over, pushing her way through the crowd. I'd never been happier to see an Egyptian god in my life. Somehow, she'd managed to change clothes. She wore a rose-colored pantsuit, lots of gold jewelry, and a cashmere coat. So she looked like a wealthy businesswoman. Ignoring the cop, she sized up my appearance and wrinkled her nose. "Carter, I told you not to wear those horrible falconry clothes. Honestly, you look like you've been sleeping in the wild." She took out a handkerchief and made a big production of wiping my face, while the policeman stared. Ma'am," he finally managed, "is this your nephew?" Bass lied. "I'm so sorry, officer. We're heading to Memphis for a falconry competition. I hope he hasn't caused any problems. We're going to miss our flight." The falcon can't fly?" Bass giggled. "Well, of course it can fly, officer. It's a bird." His face reddened. "I mean on a plane." "Oh, we have the paperwork." To my amazement, she pulled out an envelope and handed it to the cop, along with our tickets. "I see," the cop said. He looked our tickets over. "You bought a first-class ticket for your falcon." "It's a black kite, actually," Bass said. "But yes, it's a very temperamental bird. A prize winner, you know. Give it a coach seat and try to offer it pretzels, and I won't be held responsible for the consequences. No, we always fly first class, don't we, Carter?" Yeah, Aunt Kitty." She flashed me a look that said, "I'll get you for that." And then she went back to smiling at the cop, who handed back our tickets and Sadie's paperwork. "Well, if you'll excuse us, officer. That's a very handsome uniform, by the way. Do you work out?" Before he could respond, Bass grabbed my arm and hurried me toward the security checkpoint. "Don't look back," she said under her breath. As soon as we turned the corner, Bass pulled me aside by the vending machines. The set animal is close, she said. We've got a few minutes at best. What's wrong with Sadie? She can't... I stammered. I don't know exactly. Well, we'll have to figure it out on the plane. How did you change clothes? I asked. And the documents for the bird. She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, mortal minds are weak. That document is an empty ticket sleeve. And my clothes haven't really changed. It's just a glamour. I looked at her more closely, and I saw she was right. Her new clothes flickered like a mirage over her usual leopard skin bodysuit. As soon as she pointed it out, the magic seemed flimsy and obvious. We'll try to make it to the gate before the set animal, she said. It will be easier for you to stow your things in the doo-wop. What? You don't really want to tote that box around under your arm, do you? Use the doo-wop as a storage bin. How? Bass rolled her eyes. Honestly, what do they teach magicians these days? We had about 20 seconds of training. Just imagine a space in the air, like a shelf or a treasure chest. A locker? I asked. I've never had a school locker. Fine. Give it a combination lock, anything you want. Imagine opening the locker with your combination, then shove the box inside. When you need it again, just call it to mind and it will appear. I was skeptical, but I imagined the locker. I gave it a combination. 13, 32, 33. Retired numbers for the Lakers. Obviously, Chamberlain, Johnson, Abdul-Jabbar. I held out my dad's magic box and let it go. Sure, it would smash to the floor. Instead, the box disappeared. Cool, I said. Are you sure I can get it back? No, Bass said. Now come on.